Angelina Jolie's Unbroken told the incredible story of Louis Zamperini, an Olympic runner, a plane crash survivor, a prisoner of war who endured some of the most brutal camps of World War II. It's one of the greatest survival stories ever put on film. But there's one problem. The movie ends halfway through the story. The title called him Unbroken, but when Louis came home, he was anything but. Behind the hero's welcome was a man consumed by nightmares, rage, and alcohol. The ocean and prison camps couldn't destroy him, but the battle wasn't over. The greatest rescue of his life would not happen on a life raft in the Pacific. It would happen years later, and it never made it onto the screen.
Some stories find you right when you need them. Subscribe, and your Afterward could be waiting for you.
Since young, Louis Zamperini had been a fighter. He was born in 1917 to Italian immigrant parents in Olean, New York. When he was 2 years old, the family moved across the country to Torrance, California. The transition was rough. Louis spoke almost no English. The local kids mocked his accent, picked fights with him, and treated him like an outsider. So Louis learned how to fight back. His father taught him how to box, but the lessons worked a little too well. Before long, Louis was brawling with anyone who crossed him. He stole food, skipped school, and drank alcohol at an age when most boys were still playing games. Police officers became familiar with his name. By his teenage years, he seemed headed toward a future of trouble rather than success. But one person saw something different: his older brother, Pete. Pete believed the wild, rebellious teenager possessed a rare gift, so he dragged Louis onto the school track team. At first, Louis hated running. Then he discovered something surprising. He was fast, very fast. The same stubbornness that got him into trouble became fuel on the track. Soon, the former delinquent was breaking records. Then, he started breaking expectations. By the end of high school, Louis had set a national high school mile record. The achievement earned him a scholarship to the University of Southern California. People began calling him the Torrance Tornado. In 1936, at just 19 years old, he qualified for the Olympic Games in Berlin. He didn't walk away with an Olympic medal that day. He actually finished 8th in the grueling 5,000-meter final. But he shattered expectations by running his final lap in an astonishing 56 seconds. This earned him massive international recognition and became the defining moment of his track career. But the race that would define his life had not yet begun. The war was about to change everything. By 1943, Louis Zamperini had traded running shoes for military service. On May 27th, he boarded a B-24 bomber known as the Green Hornet. 850 miles south of Hawaii, disaster struck. The aircraft plunged into the Pacific Ocean. 8 of the 11 crew members died. Only Louis, pilot Russell Phillips, and tail gunner Francis McNamara survived. The 3 men climbed into tiny life rafts and drifted into one of the most extraordinary survival ordeals in history. For 47 days, they battled starvation, dehydration, relentless sun, circling sharks, and even attacks from a Japanese bomber. McNamara eventually died from starvation. Louis and Phillips continued drifting alone. Day after day, the ocean stretched endlessly in every direction. Adrift in the vast Pacific, they had no rescue, no certainty, and no control over their destiny. For perhaps the first time in his life, Louis reached the limits of his own strength. One night, staring into the darkness above him, he made a desperate promise. If God would save him, he would serve him. Nothing happened. The sky remained silent, and the raft kept drifting. But the promise had been made, and years later, Louis would discover that God had not forgotten it. After 47 days at sea, land finally appeared on the horizon. The nightmare seemed over. In reality, it was just beginning. Shoreline belonged to the Marshall Islands, deep inside Japanese-controlled territory. He and Russell Phillips were immediately captured. For the next 2 years, Louis would endure some of the most brutal prisoner of war camps in the Pacific. Back home, the US military believed he was dead. His family received a telegram declaring him killed in action. They mourned a son who was still alive, barely. The camps were filled with starvation, disease, beatings, and humiliation. But one man made Louis's life especially miserable. A sadistic prison guard named Mutsuhiro Watanabe, known simply as the Bird. Watanabe quickly learned that Louis had once been an Olympic athlete. Instead of admiring him, he became obsessed with breaking him. The beatings became relentless. Sometimes Louis was punched for no reason at all. Other times, he was singled out in front of the other prisoners and publicly humiliated. The Bird seemed determined to crush not just Louis's body, but his spirit. Yet Louis refused to give him the satisfaction. The more Watanabe attacked him, the more determined he became to resist. That stubbornness helped him survive, but it also planted something dangerous inside him. Hatred. Deep, burning hatred. By August 1945, the war was finally over. The camps were liberated, and Louis returned home a national hero. To the world, he had won. Louis left the prison camp behind, but the memories, nightmares, and desire for revenge came home with him. And unlike the prison camp, there was no gate he could simply walk out of. In 1946, Louis married Cynthia Applewhite. For a brief moment, it looked as though life was returning to normal. But the war had never really ended. Every night, Louis saw the face of the Bird. Sleep offered no escape. Again and again, he relived the beatings. Again and again, he dreamed of revenge. Sometimes, the dreams became so vivid that he woke up attacking Cynthia in his sleep. The woman who loved him most was now suffering alongside him. To numb the pain, Louis turned to alcohol. One drink became several. Several became many. The Olympic hero who had once inspired a nation was slowly destroying himself. Hatred became his constant companion. Louis was obsessed over the Bird, consumed by thoughts of revenge against him. The man who had survived Japanese prison camps was now trapped in a prison of his own making. The alcohol, the rage, and the nightmares tightened their grip on his life. Their marriage began to crack under the strain. Eventually, Cynthia reached her breaking point. She filed for divorce. Louis Zamperini's life was falling apart. And then, Cynthia walked into a tent. There, she heard a speaker who delivered a life-changing message. The speaker that night was a young evangelist named Billy Graham. If you haven't heard about Billy Graham, we shared his story in another video. Click the link in the description below, or watch till the end to find out. Cynthia returned home, convinced that Louis needed to hear the same message. He refused.
No, that's not for me. It's ridiculous. I won't go.
Then, he reluctantly agreed. At the first meeting, he became angry and walked out. But something kept pulling him back. So he returned a second time. As Billy Graham spoke, Louis found himself thinking about another night years earlier. A night on a life raft in the middle of the Pacific. A night when he had looked into the darkness and made a promise. If God saves me, I will serve him. Suddenly, he realized something. God had kept his side of the bargain. Louis had not. Years of memories crashed into him at once. The ocean, the camps, the suffering, and the countless times God had preserved his life. For years, he had been running from the promise he made on that life raft. That night, Louis stopped running. He surrendered his life to Christ.
And a flashback to the life raft. And I kept thinking, I came back from the war alive, and I never even thought about those prayers. Never even tried to keep one prayer.
And then something remarkable happened. Not because his memories disappeared, but because the hatred did. For years, thoughts of the Bird had consumed him. Now, for the first time, he no longer wanted revenge. The nightmares that had haunted him since the war suddenly stopped. The man who could not escape his past finally found peace. Louis later said that he walked into the meeting carrying a heavy burden and walked out feeling as if it had been lifted. The prisoner was finally free from himself. The following year, Louis returned to Japan. It wasn't to seek revenge. He returned to Japan and, one by one, offered forgiveness to the very guards he had once dreamed of killing. Only one person was missing: Mutsuhiro Watanabe, the bird. Louis wanted to meet him face to face, but Watanabe refused. Years later, Louis wrote him a letter. The bitterness was gone. In its place stood grace. The bird never responded, but forgiveness does not require a reply. It only requires a decision. The man who had once survived the Pacific Ocean had finally conquered something far more difficult: his own hatred. Hollywood told an incredible story about survival, but survival was never the point. Louis Zamperini survived the crash, the ocean, and the prison camps. What he could not survive was the hatred he brought home with him. He did not save himself through elite grit or athletic resilience. Human willpower kept him alive, but only divine grace set him free.